Okay. So what do search and selection companies want? Well, essentially they are hired by the client, and the client is generally a corporation. It might be a charity, NGO, or a PLC. Mainly they tend to be medium-sized to large companies. A lot of small companies generally do recruitment themselves. But essentially, search and selection companies cover a whole range of different recruitment companies. They're often called high street agencies, right up to kind of headhunters, and everything in between. It's a very large market. And essentially what people are trying to do is find that one person or a couple of people for their client. At this point, I just wanted to ask you what kind of level, how much work experience you have had post-qualification, if you could indicate on the poll. This is because really which search and selection companies are most valuable for you is really dependent on how much experience you have. So that's a key thing to consider, whether you're dealing with the right level of search and selection company. One thing I find quite a lot with clients I work with is that as they progress in their career, they don't tend to, or sometimes they don't tend to move up to work with higher level search and selection companies. So, for example, one MBA that I was working with was still dealing with the kind of agencies he dealt with pre-MBA. Really what he needed to be doing is working with a different level of recruitment company. Generally, search and selection companies are organised on the salary line, so headhunting really happens at the top, whereas high street agencies deal with lower level positions. But I'll be talking about that a little bit later. And I'll just check we've got no questions. Yep, okay. So what else do headhunters want? Well, basically headhunters are in it for the money, or recruitment agencies are in it for the money. And it's important for you to realise that their earnings vary between the average of 15% to 33% of the annual salary of candidates. So that's how they're remunerated. And that's important to bear in mind when you're negotiating your salary with a company, that the recruitment agency is on the side of the corporation, not on your side. But it is in their benefit for you to get a higher salary because they get a higher percentage in terms of their fee. Okay. So what else do recruiters want? Well, increasingly now, especially in this market, it's getting very competitive for headhunters. And I use headhunters as a catch-all phrase, really, so any kind of recruitment company. And often the case is that a candidate needs to stay with a corporation or a company that's hired them for 3 to 6 months for the recruitment agency to get paid. So the recruitment agency has to, probably more than ever now, make sure that it's a good fit. So how do they do that? Well, they want to know that you've thought about your career and what it is you really want, so that you don't make a bad decision. Because if you leave after a day, they won't get paid. So the key thing, one of the key things we work with our clients in our practice is around making sure that they're clear on what we call their career assessment. So they're clear on what their top skills are, what their values are, which is important when looking at the values of other companies, of the company they want to potentially work for, what they're really interested in. When a recruiter interviews you, they can see how passionate you are about a certain area or an industry. And that can often make you stand out against other candidates. Preferences, what kind of environment makes you thrive, what kind of environment, what kind of employees or other people that you work with would best suit you, and an idea of where you want to be in the long term, whether this is a good long-term move for you. So it's important that you've done this kind of thinking, both from your point of view, obviously, but also from the recruitment agency's point of view. It's very powerful when you interview somebody who has really thought through these things. And that's mainly because they need to sell themselves to the recruitment agency. A recruitment agency will see a lot of candidates, and they're doing a lot of sifting for the client. So somebody who knows what they want and is very clear on articulating that is very powerful. And I'm going to show you how you can access these exercises a little bit later on. One of the key exercises I'm going to show you is the skills exercise. There's an exercise that you have access to through the website, which I'll show you in a minute, where you can do an exercise to think about what you have really enjoyed doing and you're good at, and what kind of skills you want to use in the future. And they're normally the ones you've enjoyed doing and you're good at. And very important that you're gathering evidence of your top skills for what's called a competency-based interview. And a competency-based interview is something that a lot of companies use. Probably the only companies that don't use them that much are very small companies, because maybe their recruitment process won't be that developed. But competency-based interviews are when a company interviews you against, often they're called soft skills, so skills that are difficult to see on a CV. So a competency skill might be communication skills, or ability to think entrepreneurially, or ability to deal with conflict. So those kind of competencies. And so this exercise helps you give evidence of your top skills. So if you think about your skills right now, how many of you could, off the top of your head, give me your 3 skills and evidence that you have those 3 skills? And if you can't do that, then I would suggest you need to do some kind of exercise to really draw out what those skills are. Okay. So the first part of any kind of job search strategy, and this links in with recruitment agencies because obviously they're part of your job search strategy for most of you, will be to know yourself and what you can offer. And this is a really strong foundation, and it will make you very powerful at interview. The next stage is the research and networking, so then going out to find what it is you want. And then finally, the last stage is getting interviews and performing well. And that's really where recruitment consultancies come in. So on this webinar, we've kind of jumped ahead a little bit to look at the getting interviews piece. So if we now look at the 4 ways to get interviews, I think advertising is the way traditionally, and certainly when I first came into recruitment, a lot of jobs were advertised, and it used to be a really expensive way to recruit. For example, an advertisement in the Sunday Times used to be about £20,000. Now you can do that a lot cheaper with online websites. There's a huge amount of recruitment websites, and a lot of executive search and selection companies or recruitment agencies will use that kind of advertising. So it is definitely something you need to look at. For the UK, one of the main websites is Exec Appointments, which is part of the Financial Times. So that's a main route to market. It's good if you're trying to move up within your industry and within your function. It's good if you're trying to change industry. Where it's not good is if you're trying to change function and industry. Executive search and selection companies, which we're going to be looking at in more depth this evening. Obviously, that's a key way to get interviews. And I just wanted to ask you how many of you have, if you can say yes or no, whether you've used an executive search and selection company or a recruitment agency to get a job in your career. So if you can raise, I think on the, just let me drop down. If you go to the little tick, and if you can say yes or no, whether you've used a recruitment agency or a search and selection company to get a job, if you can put that next to your name. So somebody's put no, they haven't. Anybody else? Let's see. A couple of people. Okay, a few people haven't so far. So if you can go to your feedback and just let me know whether you've used a recruitment agency or headhunter to get a job at any point. Okay. I think one of the main benefits of search and selection companies or recruitment agencies is that they're out there in the market. That's how they get paid. They get paid to find opportunities and place people, and that's how they earn their kind of 15% to 33%. And I'll be explaining why there's such a difference a little bit later. So while I don't think they should be a main route to market, they are a very important route to market, especially if you are not particularly strongly networked in your industry or in your function. And that moves us on to networking. We will be having a webinar on networking. It is one of the key ways to get a job, especially in a tight market. A lot of companies don't want to pay between 15 and 33% to hire a candidate. They would prefer to find it through that person through their own network. One, because they will often know how good somebody is through using their own network. That person will often come recommended. And two, obviously it's much cheaper to recruit direct or through their network. And that brings us on to direct contact. I think especially for small to medium-sized companies, but I have seen this used with larger companies as well, just making direct contact with somebody who could potentially hire you can often get your foot in the door, especially if you have really relevant experience. Again, most companies, certainly when I recruited for PwC, were very keen to increase their direct contact hires so that they didn't have to pay recruitment agencies. Okay. Oh, a few more of you have filled in the feedback. Let me just have a little look at that. Great. Okay. Okay. So few of you. Good. And I think, some of you, those of you who have said yes, that you have used a recruitment consultancy, can you put your, let's see, could you raise your hand if you've had a bad experience of a recruitment agency by your name? Can you raise your hand if you've had a bad experience? I do this because often I find in workshops I run, people have had a bad experience. Oh, somebody's had a bad experience. And I think as you progress through your career, something that's worth bearing in mind is that as you become more senior, a lot of senior positions aren't advertised, or and they are dealt exclusively through headhunters. And I'll be explaining how that works a little bit later. And I know I've had bad experience of recruitment agencies as well. I've heard dreadful urban myths, and well, actually, in one of the companies I used to work for, this actually happened. Somebody sent the CV of a candidate to the firm they were actually working for by mistake. So I think in certainly at the lower levels, they don't have a great reputation, and some of you as managers may have come across recruitment agencies, especially at the lower levels. They kind of resemble estate agents, really. So I think, it's just changing your mindset a little bit, especially as you become more senior. I mean, a lot of people who work for the executive search and selection companies at the higher level, a lot of them will have MBAs, a lot of them will be really experienced in industry. And when I worked for Norman Broadbent, we had the CEO of the Body Shop come and work for Norman Broadbent. So you get some pretty senior people coming to work in headhunters at the more senior level. I will explain as we go on how they work. Okay, thank you for that, everyone. So the service is often offered by the recruitment industry. Basically, at the most senior level, it is headhunting. You don't see a job advertised often, very rarely. Say, for example, for the CEO of BP. Okay, so Senior positions often get headhunted, sometimes positions where there's an incumbent, so somebody already doing the job that they want to kind of fire perhaps. They obviously can't advertise that role. Sometimes they'll advertise it blind, but often that will be a headhunting, a role that has to be headhunted. And I think in terms of that market, I don't know how many of you are at that more senior level, kind of director level, then it's a case of increasing your visibility. So being visible in your industry, being visible speaking at conferences, writing papers, writing articles, anything that you can do to raise your visibility within your industry really helps your networking, helps you get seen. Because researchers working for consultants working for senior headhunting companies, and in the UK those would be companies like Odgers, Korn Ferry, Heidrick & Struggles, those types of companies, Egon Zehnder. Researchers are looking for people who are very visible and who they can use to contact, to ask them whether they know people, or basically a researcher scopes the market. So they're building a picture of who is in the market, and they will often have kind of lists of companies that they want to headhunt out of. So that's at the very senior level. And if you ever get approached by a search and selection company to ask if you know anybody who could do this type of role, I would suggest it would be good to be as helpful as possible, because then you are in the mind of the researcher, who may then consider you for a role later down the track. Okay. So does anyone have any questions? Do you want to use the Q&A on the senior level headhunting? So it's always a bit of a kind of dark, mysterious kind of part of the market, I think, because nothing's advertised. Often a lot of positions are quite sensitive. So there's, I suppose in a way it's a part of the industry that's quite hidden in mystique. Okay. So a major part of the market is advertising. And in the UK, that has definitely moved more online. And then a way, to make sure that you're that you are using the right recruitment agencies and also using the right websites is to see what kind of roles are being advertised in your industry magazine. For example, my industry magazine is People Management, and at the back a lot of recruitment agencies advertise roles. And often if they're recruiting for one kind of role, it means that another client may well get in touch and say, oh, I see you're recruiting an HR director. We're looking for one of those. Do you have people on your database? That often happens in the recruitment industry. So a lot of these recruitment agencies have websites where they advertise, have their own website where they advertise their roles. And a lot of these you can sign up for alerts. One area, just as a quick tip, I think is great for advertising is LinkedIn. LinkedIn I'm seeing being used more and more for advertising jobs. A lot of companies advertise direct, and as I said earlier, a lot of companies are very keen to advertise direct because then they don't have to pay recruitment agency fees. Okay, so do sign up for alerts on things like LinkedIn. I'm seeing actually a lot of jobs advertised on LinkedIn that are big companies, obviously looking at it as a good route to market. And then at the lower end, which is where a lot of recruitment agencies sit, is this database. And it kind of interlinks with the advertising as well. So they might put ads on Monster board. Monster, for example, in the UK is a big one. I think that's European. Well, it is European as well. So Monster, that type of thing. And I think here you have to be pretty careful about where your CV gets sent, especially if you're on a database like Monster board. A lot of recruitment agencies subscribe to it, and then they take CVs off the database and then send them all over the place. So I will be talking about this a little bit later, as you need to make sure you protect yourself.
Jane,
Yes.
Just quickly, Maria Kelly's asked, how do you know which are the best headhunters?
Good question. Yep. The best way is by recommendation of people in your industry. The market changes very quickly, and a lot of people, they can move on quite quickly, and they'll often take their clients with them. A good way is to look at the major firms and who the recruitment consultant is, and kind of track them. And a good way to do that is through LinkedIn. But I'd use, colleagues and friends in the industry to ask them who they might have used when they've changed jobs, and then keep in touch with them. For example, the people that I worked with when I started in recruitment, I don't know how long ago that was. I don't know if I should tell you, but it was probably about 15 years ago. They are now working for some of the top headhunting companies, but they used to work, for my old company, and so they have kind of really gone up the scale. So, for example, one guy did accountancy, and now he's recruiting finance directors. So a lot of his candidates have kind of moved with him, and he's moved them every couple of years. So I hope that answers your question. So it's a case of doing your homework. There's another question here. Are there any particularly good LinkedIn groups for finding senior level roles? I would suggest that you link into your so let's say you're a marketing manager in fast-moving consumer goods. I would try and join some groups for that, and then ask as a general question, has anybody moved jobs recently? And if you have, can you recommend a headhunter? I mean, that would be one thing to do. For finding senior level roles, I think you would probably be better signing up to the LinkedIn jobs. There's a way that if you go onto the LinkedIn site, you can sign up for alerts. If you're part of a group, you can often see through the feeds when people have changed jobs, and that often shows you an opportunity. For example, a CEO of a big company up here has recently left, and I know there's a vacancy there because he left under a bit of a cloud. And so his alert came up on my LinkedIn news feed, and I could see that he'd left. So if I was looking for a role in that company, I would think, oh, there might be a role there. So I hope that answers your question. Okay. Good. Oh, and I've had another one. Okay. A question here is, people say networking is the way to get a job. Is there any point responding to advertisements on LinkedIn, specialist sites in the management consultancy industry, without being personally introduced to the company? Absolutely, yes. I mean, I think, networking is a good way to get a job, and a lot of people do get jobs through networking. I think it's great if you can get personally introduced to a company, but I think sometimes there'll be companies you've never heard of. Unless you've got the time to really scope out your market and make direct approaches and network into all the companies you want to work for, then absolutely I think it's worth responding to advertisements on LinkedIn and specialist sites. Yeah. Okay. So how do you choose? There are a lot of recruitment agencies. Okay. And so I'm just going to show you how to log in. So if you go to our website, which is workmaze.com, I'm hoping everyone can see this. No. Hang on a minute. Okay, share my desktop. Okay. So what you need to do is sign in. The username is OUBS, and the password is SBUO. Okay. So the executive recruitment guides, here they are, and these are, we put these together through personal recommendations and research we've done of people that we know in the market. Let's have a look at the one for the UK. Basically, there are 100 companies in each report. We couldn't do an exhaustive one, else that would run to kind of probably hundreds of thousands in certain countries. But we put the main ones here. So if you look at the company I used to work for, Norman Broadbent, okay, it says, outlines a little bit of their specialism and the key contacts. I think one of the key things I'd like to say to you all is, if at all possible, send your CV and covering letter to a named contact. It means that they're more likely to look for it. If it goes to admin@normanbroadbent.com or whatever, it will get put on the database, and then some consultants are better than others at looking at the database when they're looking for candidates, especially at a more senior level. They don't use the database so much. If you remember the triangle I showed you, it isn't quite as distinct as that. There is a grey area. So, for example, Norman Broadbent they will have a database. They won't particularly offer that to clients, but they will often use that as a starting point for maybe an advertised assignment where they'll put ads out, or a search assignment where they're headhunting in the market in particular companies or for particular types of people, and they will use their database as a starting point. And occasionally somebody from the database will get hired. But they want to differentiate themselves from kind of high street database agencies, so they don't often advertise the fact. But building a relationship with that key contact is really important if you can. So if you can get in to see them, sometimes they won't. Some consultants are quite keen to see candidates, especially ones they think are pretty good. So if you do get the opportunity to meet them, and it could be a case of emailing them, I'm coming into London on Friday, can I pop in for 20 minutes and just introduce myself? They may not go for it. I think you have to accept the fact they're very busy and they get paid by the client. They don't get paid to meet lots of candidates unless they are on an assignment. Okay, so it takes up their time to meet somebody speculatively. Okay, so obviously there are further contacts on the website and where there are other offices, and then obviously a bit more information. So it's just a starting point really for your looking at recruitment agencies and which ones to use. Generally these guides are at the more senior level because there's no way we could do it for kind of the lower level roles, and we're assuming most of you are operating at kind of the mid to senior level. Okay. So while we're here, right at the beginning of the webinar, I talked about your self-assessment and knowing what you want and what you have to offer. And on the website, there's some exercises that we use in our workshops. I've actually written a book with these similar kind of exercises in and a few case studies and more information around it, but you don't actually need to buy the book. You can just do these exercises. And if you're thinking in the future of working with a career coach, I would suggest that you do these exercises because you will dramatically reduce the amount of time you need to spend with a career coach. And obviously you can discuss these with your career coach, but this kind of self-reflection is a kind of bedrock to any kind of career coaching. So essentially the first exercise was the one that I picked out as absolutely one of the most important. And what you need to do with this exercise is list 12 events in your life when you enjoyed what you did and you were proud of your contribution. And most people can get to kind of 6 or 7, to be honest. And then you choose your top events. And then for each of those events, you then describe what was your main achievement, what kind of environment you worked in, did you work alone or with other people, and then helping you draw out what kind of skills did you use. And if we skip on, you do that for 6 events. Oops. Then we give a list of skills to help you think, okay, which skills was I using there? And then that should give you your top skills and an idea of kind of a summary, really, of what types of achievements you've had, what kind of environment you enjoy, to kind of help you summarize that. And here's a book here. If you struggle with that, I still recommend you do this, because this book is a bit of it's a great book, but it is a little bit of a cop-out in a way, because it essentially you do an online questionnaire. It's a very good questionnaire. It was devised by Gallup, the Gallup organisation, and essentially it tells you what kind of skills it has. But they're very generic. I think it's a useful test to do. So do this kind of self-analysis, and then maybe buy this book and do this online questionnaire that Marcus Buckingham has put together. I think that's good. It's good as well. Then there's the values exercise I was talking about. There's one about interests, thinking about what you're really interested in, one about work environments, and then one about long-term planning. So you get to a point where there's where you summarize your career, really. What are your top skills, your top values, what's your interests? Oh, sorry about that. And then we get to the point where you produce a matrix where you look at possible jobs or possible careers, and then you, on the horizontal axis, you put the outputs from the exercise. And then you can score them against different careers or different roles you're considering. Okay. And why this is important is it helps you do your due diligence on companies, and while some of you are probably thinking, well, in this market, I'd be lucky to get a job. Even in a difficult market, and I've worked in headhunting in difficult markets, good candidates who are concerned that this is the right fit, not just any job, are very attractive, because you know that they are taking the time to make sure this is the right opportunity, even if it's a tough market, so that they will give their best to this role, and that's what a company wants to see. So although sometimes this seems a bit strange, it helps you stand out from everybody else, that you've done this kind of thinking about what you really want. So many people I interview have no idea what they want to do with their life in terms of their work. So they come across as being pretty wishy-washy. They don't really know what skills they have to offer. They can't really sell themselves. They don't have any kind of spark or passion about what they do. So if I see somebody who has that, then they really stand out from the other candidates. Okay. So we're just going to go back to the presentation now. Okay. So you're able to go in yourself and have a look at that. Okay. So let's look at the process that a search and selection company will go through. So the first stage is how my desk has looked in the past, just hundreds and hundreds of CVs. So it's a sifting process. And really, it's very simple. All we're really looking for is a checklist of the criteria for the role. Do they meet? Do they have the experience required? So that's why I think somebody had a question about networking. I think particularly if you don't meet a lot of the criteria for roles, perhaps if you're trying to change career or do something slightly different, then this replying to ads probably won't be quite as successful for you. So that was a very good question earlier about that. And here, especially in a tight market, you probably do have to meet quite a lot of the criteria to get a look in and get through the sifting process. I think one thing to bring up here is that, it's very difficult for recruitment agencies to look at competencies. So is somebody a good communicator? Are they a good presenter? You can't really tell that from a CV. I mean, you do look at their grammar, their format, the way they've laid things out. It shows how clearly they think. But really at this stage we're looking at, do they have enough experience? Do they have these key skills? Have they had this kind of experience? So it's a sifting, very simple process. So the more you can do to make that simple, the better. And, for example, I see covering letters which are massively long, big paragraphs, which I just can't be bothered to read. So keep it very, very clean. The second process is interview by phone. A lot of interviews are done by phone, especially at the moment, to cut down on travel costs, especially if you're trying to get a role abroad. Then from that big pile of CVs, you get down to a long list where you've done those telephone interviews. You present that to the client, normally about 10 to 12 candidates, it varies, and the client says, yes, you're on the right track, or no, go back and sift through those CVs again, or re-advertise, or start, do another search. Then the recruitment agency or headhunter will do the interviews face-to-face. Most headhunters I know, especially at the lower levels, are still doing a kind of an experience